Hi Chris, thanks for sending us your video of you at Donington Park. I'll talk about the incident, Coppice incident, right at the end. I'll make a note of it now. Coppice crash. I'll talk about that at the end. It's a completely separate thing. Made some notes here, which we're going to go through. We'll skim through it fairly quickly. Generally speaking, pretty good. There's some really good stuff there, which is great to see. There's a few basic errors as well, as you can imagine. Not sure how long you've had the bike or how you've got the bike set up, whether it's stock. I'm guessing by the sound of it, it sounds like pretty much a stock bike. And looking at the fairing setup, it looks fairly standard. Either way, mine is as well, so don't kind of lose sleep over that. Whether you've delved into the electronic side of things, again, I don't really know. I can see you've got it set up in Race Promo 1, but what actual settings you've got dialed in there, I'm not really sure. And there certainly seems to be a little bit of an element of, I wouldn't say lack of trust in the bike, but you have to, with the modern stuff, with all the electronics, rider aids and that, you have to kind of trust them a little bit more than I think you are doing as it stands now. There's a couple of standout things in your riding, and we'll talk about them in more detail as they happen. You do a certain amount of what I call short shifting, which is changing up early in the rev range when the bike's kind of accelerating on a straight, and there's very often absolutely no need for it. There is a time to short shift, and again we'll talk about that, and Donington is a great example for this. Two places you short shift at Donington to get the kind of, out of my perspective, to get the best out of the bike. And again, I'm assuming here you've got road gearing on the bike, because it certainly sounds like it, looking at what gears that you're actually using around the track. You need to use more throttle, and that sounds terribly obvious. Throttle and RPM are completely different things. You need to rev the bike, obviously, but revving the bike on tiny amounts of throttle isn't particularly the right thing to do. You're better off using less RPM and more throttle opening, because your bike puts out, for argument's sake, a little over 200 horsepower at sort of 13,500 RPM. But often you'll be revving the bike quite high, and I can just tell by the sound, by the lack of induction noise, that you're revving the bike, but you haven't got the throttle open. And I can tell also by the fact that how quickly the throttle or the RPM rises and falls, what the throttle is or isn't doing. So we need to physically get the throttle open more and combine that with RPM, and it changes the bike quite dramatically. And don't always follow the track. I don't mean ride on the grass, but again, we'll talk about it in more detail. You sometimes are using the edge of the track as your guide, as where you should be, and sometimes that's not always the case. The use of track is quite important. As long as you stay on the tarmac, that ribbon, that riding line that you create, all you have to do is stay on the tarmac. And again, that sounds terribly obvious, I know, and we'll talk about it in slightly more detail. We're going to start the lap from on the time bar on 4:36, and it was basically after you'd done a couple of laps, you got a couple of you got through past a few people, and we've got like 2 laps now where you kind of you've got the track to yourself. We're going to focus on this lap as the things that you're doing wrong and the things that you're doing right, and then we'll have a quick look at the second lap, just to kind of cross-reference those things again. Right, out of turn 1, the last turn, Goddards, down to turn 1. This is a start of an example of a short shift. You come out of Goddards, you've got the throttle on. It's not buried, but you've got the throttle on, and you sort of wait till the bike almost crosses the start-finish line before you really open the throttle hard, and you do a short shift. After that, you can hear the induction note change, and the revs climb really quickly, which is a great indication for me that you've got the taps open at that point. So let's have a watch. See, short shifted there. The 12 was just about to come on. For me, that was a bit of a short shift. Do you hear that? That sort of deeper tone. That tells me that the butterflies are really all the carb, basically. You call them carburetors, but the injectors are fully open when you get that second sort of noise coming up through the tank, and that's kind of what you want to hear when the bike's obviously in a straight line. So it's a really good strong blast down to turn one. You're moving over to the left hand side of the track, exactly the right sort of timing. Pretty good brakes on the approach. Start to tip in fractionally early. I use this line, which is the end of the blend line where the pit lane kind of finishes. So you've started a slightly early tip in into the corner. It's quite dramatic, the approach to Redgate, because you've gone pretty fast and the track kind of just disappears on you. So I can kind of see where that comes from. But try and hang out. You can see this section of the track is quite clean, quite clear, because that really is the racing line. So you want to sort of aim for this portion of the track, and just when you're about here, you start to tip in. So by the time you get to that line, you've already started to lean slightly. Now, here's one thing about the recordings. If you can, if your camera has the facility to turn off the stabilization or to go into a different setting, because you'll see the image, as it were, on the screen, and you'll see the bike kind of moving around underneath you. And it's the algorithms in the camera trying to kind of smooth it all out. And it's one of the reasons when you on the crash video bit, the second video where you crash, that it looks like you're well, we'll talk about it in more detail, but it's difficult to tell exactly what you're doing with the bike, because the image that you see and what the bike's doing is slightly different. But again, we'll go to that into more detail a bit later. So I've wrote down here, acceleration past the pits, really good. Bit of a short shift early on there. Braking okay. And I think here you could do with hanging on to the brakes a little bit longer, more of a trail, because as you turn in, there's quite a long time of sort of deceleration, and you run ever so slightly wide away from the apex. The service road here, which is just sort of in this section of the track, this section is where the service road comes up from your right. The apex, you can just see the curb there as that bit of a dink in it. So I'd like to try and get the bike kind of here. And your bike, by comparison, is probably only maybe 3 or 4 feet away from that apex. But if you can imagine the line that you draw around the corner, you're going to lose that 3 or 4 feet on the edge of the track, on the drift out. It's like you've made the track automatically 3 or 4 feet wide, narrower than it really is. It's particularly important for your exit of a corner that you make apexes, because the apex, you can define exactly where you are on the track. It also gives you trajectory. If you make the apex but the bike's kind of pointing down there, that's not so good, because you're going to almost certainly run really wide. So the further you can get the bike round the corner, the better you can get the bike pointing up the track, as it were, at the apex. That just gives you much more of an open, a bigger, broader section of the track to use on the coming out. It's why tipping into a corner early, it ruins the apex. You've obviously got to not tip in too late, because it's a struggle just to make the apex. So it's finding that kind of balance. So that line, that blend line we talked about, is a really good reference point. Not to go over that and then turn in, because you'll struggle to make the apex. You sort of turn in just before you get to it. So as you're going over the blend line, you're sort of already tipping in. And then theoretically then you should make the apex fairly well, or fairly easy. So that's turn one. We pop out of turn one now. Now at Donington, you're about to now go down through Hollywood and down Craner Curves. Really scary bit of track. And this is where you probably lose, I would say you lose maybe 2 seconds at least on this section of the track. And it's largely because you don't accelerate. If you listen to your bike, and we're going to play the sound of the bike all the way down towards the left-hander, and there's a progressional build-up. It's like you've spent from here, you're in third gear now, and you stay in third gear all the way down the hill. It's like you've stretched out your timeline. If you can imagine, you're not capitalizing on what a superbike can do, which is accelerate really quickly. Now, you obviously will accelerate coming out of this corner if you get into the throttle early and drive hard in the first part of the run down, and then you kind of get to a sort of an easing back situation. You obviously can't carry on accelerating all the way down the hill, otherwise it's going to get extremely messy when you go left. So there's a point where you drive super hard and then ease back, and that, I would suggest at that point, is where you go for fourth gear, and it calms the whole thing down. Because if you go down Craner Curve with the bike at 12.5, 13,000 RPM or 14,000 RPM, the bike is super reactive on what you do with the throttle. Particularly if you shut the throttle, you have a massive amount of engine braking, where you can't use all of the power at that high RPM dropping down the hill anyway, so you might as well use third gear, drive super hard in the first part of your drive out, and then do effectively a short shift into fourth, and then carry that nice calm sort of rhythm down the hill at less RPM, but it'll be much easier to control on the throttle. So let's have a little listen here. I've got Hollywood, very little acceleration, long slow build up, so let's have a listen. All the way up to there, you've gained 20 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour to push, and you've used a mile of track to do that. In fact, let's have a quick look at the track itself, and this gives you sort of a little bit of a glimpse of an idea. I use Google Maps a lot because you can actually see the apexes, you can see the curbs, you can sometimes actually see the line itself. Now, I don't know where this when they took the shot, clearly winter, but you can see here you've got the apex, which is the service road at Redgate. Then you've got the first curb, which is roughly there. You've got a second apex there, and then you've got the third apex, which is when you've got to make the decision to turn left. So you've got effectively a second straight there, and then another bit of a straight there. Now, if you watch the bike moving about going down the hill, it's like you're referencing where you are on the track, looking at the edge of the track. So you're sort of you kind of fit thrippity bitting going down the hill, and that's because you're using the edge of the track as your reference point. Instead of when you come out of Redgate, you obviously drift out to the curb on the left hand side, and then just the only time you have to worry about being on the right hand side of the track is as you're closing in on the second and the last curb before you go left at Craner Curves itself. So it's a progressive, should I say, line, almost one radius all the way down the hill. Now, as you can see here, from the exit really of Redgate to the first, not the first curb, but the first sort of kink in the track is dead straight. So that's where you do all the serious hard acceleration there. 100% throttle, really get the thing bloody wound up, get it going there. And then as you get to this point in the track, that's where I would suggest hook up into fourth, and then, I don't mean shut the throttle, but you roll right back. And to get up to your speed, you see, you go down through Craner Curve, and we see about 113, 114 mile an hour as we pass the left of Craner Curve. Now, some of that extra mile an hour is because you've leant over, and the wheel speed picks up. It's not actual true GPS speed, ground speed, because of you've gone onto the narrow, the smaller radius of the tyre. But either way, the first part of the acceleration on the first part of the straight is where you get the thing going. Now what that does, because you've got to try and picture around the track, you're going to have a riding line or a racing line, which really isn't that far away from where you should be. It's pretty good overall. But your timeline, you're stretching it out terribly. When the bike isn't accelerating, that timeline, you're just wasting time. It's just going away from you. Well, when the bike's accelerating hard, you're on the right racing line or riding line, and you're then maximising what you're doing. You're not maximising what the bike's potential is coming out of Redgate. So let's have a little and jump back into that the onboard. Oops, I'll learn how to drive this one day. Here we go. Right, so let's back up the hill, leaving Redgate. So you can see the signage in the distance there, the billboards. You've got to try and imagine you've come out of Redgate. Now, if this was a straight, going straight on down there, straight in, not dropping down the hill, would you be accelerating as you are now? The short answer is no. See, this section of the track is where you've got to really drive hard. See, you've done a rapid turn in there because you think, I've got to get over to the other side of the track. So you've tipped in there, and you can just see, it's a bit blurry, but you can just see, let me get my pen up and running again. You can just see over here, there's the first of those kinks there. Now, as I'm passing that, generally speaking, I'm probably a little more than over, let's say that's the left-hand side of the track, that's the right-hand side of the track. I'm normally kind of about there, just over halfway in the track, accelerating away. And that's where I want you to be at this point. But the point is now, how little acceleration we've done. If you'd have drove out to the left-hand curb at leaving Redgate, and then drove really, get the throttle fully wound open, at this point in the track, you will probably need to have changed into the fourth gear. But then, if you can imagine getting up to, say, 110 miles an hour now, which is so easy to do at this point in the track, and then you can run down the hill at a sort of almost a constant throttle. The point is, you're not driving hard enough, or certainly for long enough. You're just dragging that timeline out. And that's and you can see the bike kind of moving around a little bit because you're sort of following the edge of the track. The first of the curbs that you see, this one here, you're almost in a perfect line now, running down the hill there. Now the bike's going to drift out ever so slightly and then come back in again because you need to be right on the edge. As you're leaving, oops, slow down. As you're leaving this curb here, the second curb, we want to be almost wheels. Let me get my pen tool. We want to be kind of here. Now, by the time there's a little bowl bit of grass here, by the time you've got to that point in the track, you need to have started to change direction. If you don't, you're either very slow to change direction, or you wait till you see the left, you're almost certainly going to miss it. Now, you are pretty good here, in all honesty. You keep a nice sort of constant throttle. You don't shut the throttle when you change direction, which can load the front end up. It's quite important when you go left is to open the throttle even a little bit, and it just gets the bike nice and balanced to go through the left, and you do a good job of that. Here you can hear the bike's on a constant throttle, which is really good. Now we've almost immediately, we've just passed the curb now. Now where are we on the track? We're on the extreme left-hand side of the track. So we've gone round a left-hander and we've left a left-hander on the left. So if we quickly run to the map again, because the exit of Redgate and the rundown Craner Curves, it's quite a long section of track, but it's so easy to lose so much time running down there. So you can see that we've run, that's the second curve. You change direction. We'll zoom in a little bit so we can have a closer look. Let me get my pen tool up again. So we've gone past the apex, which is roughly halfway along the curve here. Now you've passed that there, and you've stayed over the left hand side of the track, so you've effectively exited the left corner on the left hand side of the track. Now when we go back to the camera, you'll see as we're approaching the hairpin itself, way before we get to the curb, you're having to turn right while you're slowing down, and that's because this section here, because it's not a straight line from the apex of the left to the old hairpin. There's that bit of a kink there. So what I would suggest to do here is get used to the idea of running down through Craner Curves and allowing the bike after the apex of the corner, allowing the bike to kind of drift out almost into the middle of the track. Now what that does is it opens the radius up, which allows you to travel through the old through the Craner Curves, the left of Craner Curves. It allows you to travel faster through there, easier, because it's less of a kink. You're tightening that radius up because you're exiting on the left. Now you think, well, God, I need to get over to the left hand side of the track. But the reality is the only time you need to get over to the left hand side of the track is when you get to that curb. Now if you think about it, if you drove in a straight line from there, you're going to get to that point anyway, because the track sort of comes back to meet you because of this kind of kink in the track here. And what I try to get people to think about is making like a giant S, a big swoop through past the apex, out into the middle of the track, and progressively bring the bike back over to the left hand side of the track, just at the right time to kind of tip it into the old hairpin. So you're not creating like a left corner, a straight, and then a right corner. You're kind of swinging around in like a nice swoopy sort of section, and it lends itself to the circuit, that kind of swooping nature of the track. Because if we quickly jump back into the video, what you'll see is, let's get back in. Oh, I've done it again. I keep forgetting to select it. There we go. So yeah, if we look at your line through here, don't use hardly any of the track out to the right hand side. You know, you're kind of here in the track, and the edge of the track's way over there. Generally speaking, I'm probably about half or three quarters of the vast majority of the time. I'm about half or three quarters in the track, because you're driving down the left hand side of the track, and you have to sort of turn right before you turn right, because of you can see the kink there, that kink there. So utilize the width of the track to drift out there, and you've got heaps of time to get over to that side of the track. Let's just turn off the and listen to the bike a second. Quite a long, slow, steady sort of roll down to the corner, because not a lot of braking, because once you've gone through the left, you immediately you start to slow down. But if you can see those little tiny dots in the distance, they're the bikes which you've just exited the old hairpin. It's actually quite a long way. It's at least 200, 250 yards, probably more than that, to the corner itself. So allow yourself a little bit of a squirt of throttle, drive and then brake. And that little short burst of throttle, and then bring it back with the brake, it doesn't shorten the distance, but it shortens the amount of time it takes there. Now that tiny bit of short burst of throttle and then a grab of brake, as opposed to a roll off and a very light brake, where you're now stretching the timeline out. The drive and brake, drive to a brake, it effectively shortens the timeline down, which gives you time, or takes time off your lap time. Anyway, I've thrown down enough of that down. The line is great through the corner. It's a good corner for you once you get there. Tipping's just about right. Pick up the throttle just at the apex, which is perfect, and you use the majority of the track coming out, which again is perfect. So once you've got to the corner itself, your line through there is spot on. Obviously, if you've accelerated coming out of the left of Craner Curves, you're going to have to rethink how you do your braking in that, which will obviously affect the corner. If you make a change in one area, it has an immediate knock-on effect, because you'll take more speed onto the straight, or you'll arrive faster at the corner, whichever. So if you improve in one section, you might find it almost cocks up the next section because you kind of arrive in there faster. So you have to do it in small sections, small little steps, as it were, so it doesn't affect everything too much. But basically, have a go at that down Craner Curves. Now here's another time, if you listen to the bike from where we are now, right the way up to McLeans. Let's have a listen. You can hear the bike progressively accelerates, and you hear like a quite a quick increase, but that's mainly because of the bike tips on its side going through under Schwantz, used to be Schwantz Bridge or Schwantz Curve, that the left kink before you get up to McLeans, and that's where the kind of the revs come from, and we're still in third gear. What I would suggest here is, if you had data on the bike, what it would show is you've got open here, but probably only, I don't know, 10 or 15%. There's not a lot of throttle happening here, but you sort of keep on that same amount of throttle, and you kind of, so you've opened the throttle coming out of the old hairpin. Let's say it's 10 or 15%, and it doesn't really change that much all the way up the hill. So there is acceleration going on, but it's dragged out over a very long period of time. Now, if you think about it logically, when you come out of the old hairpin, let's get back there. You come out of the old hairpin, the bike is now going to come upright. The bike is going to go straight. So accelerate, drive. What I tend to do is as I come out of the old hairpin and the bike starts to sit up, I go full gas and really make the thing work for a living. Drive real hard. Now that means you'll get up to the Schwantz's Curve bloody quickly, because instead of it being 10 or 15% throttle, I'm 100% throttle. So instead of having, I don't know, 65, 70 horsepower at a small amount of throttle, forget what the revs are telling you, it's what the throttle is doing. If you've got the throttle open full now, the bike will be going like a bat out of hell. So what I would suggest here is you ain't going to be able to go through the next kink with the throttle fully open. So what I do is I come out of the old hairpin, I drift out wide, drive really hard, get the bike over sort of 3/4. Your line here is really good, about 3/4 in the track. As I tip it into the kink here, I'll ease back on the throttle and short shift probably into fourth, because once again, it's difficult to use all of the bike's power here. Once I've gone through the kink on a constant throttle, after that I then come back onto the throttle and drive hard up the hill. So instead of having a constant throttle all the way up the hill, which on a low percentage, I'll drive hard coming out of the old hairpin. As I switch direction to go left, ease back, not close the throttle, but ease back on the throttle to get through the kink, and then kind of roll back into the throttle, because you've got to try and picture, this is obviously a curve, but it's such a long, it's like a motorway corner. It's like almost straight, really. You've got to drive real hard here. You know, this in reality is 145, 150 mile an hour section of track. And we're tickling it up there with lots of revs, but not a lot of acceleration or throttle. So it's similar almost to what's happening out of Redgate is happening here. You're not driving hard enough. It sounds great because you're revving the arse out of it, but that is on a relatively small percentage of throttle. Data would show you this. I mean, I've got 3D data on my bike, and it's about, You can get the kits from BMW and they're literally plug-in, and you've got all the data on your laptop and you can drive yourself mad with it. It's brilliant. But it actually shows you exactly what is happening on the bike and what you're doing. And it cuts out all the, oh yeah, I was on full gas there. No, you weren't. I was revving the bike. Yeah, you were revving the bike, but you weren't on full gas. It cuts a lot of that out. Either way, that's what I think going through the... If anything, I think you tip in fractionally early to go through the left of into McLeans. You bring it back on the brake there, which is fine. And it's a tough one, McLeans. As you're coming into it, where the curb starts, you can see, let me just get my pen out here. You can see where the black and white, red and white curb is here. There's a sort of a natural bump in the curb. And as you're approaching it, it tends to suck you into that, like that's the apex, and it isn't. The apex of McLeans is, there's a second bump a little bit further around the corner. There's the first bump there, as you can see it here. And then just where you can see the green is about to finish, there's a second bump here in the curb. And it's this second bump which is the true apex of the corner. If you apex a little bit early, which you've done here, it becomes a really tight corner because you've got to hang on to the curb to get to that second apex. And it's very often why, as you pass this corner, if you've had to do that, it's very often why the bike kind of pings out and it fires you across over to the left. You should be, you should be where you are now, but you listening to the bike again, you've kind of been pushed out there and you're quite reluctant to come on the throttle. So tipping in slightly later into McLeans, your track position is fine going into where you transition from left over to right, it's fine there. But you just tip in that little bit, you get kind of sucked in a little bit early and it upsets your exit somewhat. Now it's obviously a straight line. See that dot in the distance there? That's how far it is up there. So maximise what you're doing on the straight. If we have a little listen to the bike here. It's all a little bit and then straight away you're on the brakes again. Sort of drive, get comfortable in opening the throttle. If you've got a good setting in the bike and you've got lots of traction on the bike, as you can see by here, you've got lots of safety in the bike, maximise that, get the throttle open. If anything, you don't brake very hard coming up here. I'm listening to the rate of deceleration. You know, you're obviously on the brake, I can tell by that, but it's all kind of a little bit early and a little bit soft, where I think you can go a little bit later and a little bit harder, but make sure you're off the brake, obviously, before you go over the rise. Now, while we're here, we might as well talk about what I think happened here on the crash. I'd be interested to know, was it on an outlap or was it early in a session, for one? And I was looking at trying to look at your angular dangle, basically going round there. And it flashed up about 46 degrees. It was increasing as it was happening, but this is where the camera on the bike and what the algorithm is doing. Look at the bike tips in, but the horizon doesn't, because the camera's slightly behind what's going on. And what I think happened is just before you see the curb. Difficult more or less where we are now. It's quite difficult without actually being there. Right at this point, you're going uphill, and you like go over a rise. It's almost like a bit of a hump, but what it is, it's just the track flattens out just before you get to the apex. So that going over a slight rise, it can make the bike slightly light as it goes over there. Now I've played it quite a lot of times. I went back and back and back and back and back and back listening to it. And it sounded like what it happened is you leaned into the corner and you opened the throttle really just a bit too early, more or less where the rise was. And I think what happens there is the bike kind of unloads as it goes over the rise, so the grip is poor on the front by comparison. Where if you just kept the throttle closed until you're quite close to the apex. Let's have a little listen to this lap. See, it's just after the apex you pick the throttle on. Now that's what I would recommend going into Coppice, is leave the throttle closed until you're just at or just after the apex. And what happens then is you're keeping weight on the front wheel as it goes over the rise, where if you try to get on the throttle that bit too early, just as it plateaus out, because remember, it's not a hump in the track, it's more the track kind of levels out. I think that's what's happened. So possible, if it was early in the session, it might have been the tyre being a bit cool. It wasn't, you weren't going super fast. I don't think it was too much of a speed issue. I think it was a combination of probably all three, but I think it was just that picking the throttle up that little bit too early is the way I would, because it didn't look like he did it. I had to play it half a dozen times to sort of think, well, what happened there? It was one of them strange ones. Tyre choice can be an interesting thing here. If it was early in the session and you're running like not a non-super sport tyre, more like a track day tyre, which you don't really need tyre warmers from, I would still try and go down the route of running tyre warmers, because it allows you to get up to your pace without taking a couple of laps to get some heat into the tyre. Because road-based tyres, they will warm up faster, but they have a lower ceiling, if you will. So basically, they overheat that little bit earlier than a race tyre would be. Race tyres, the working temperature range is that bit higher, which means when they're cold, they've no grip at all, or a very poor grip. Where the road tyres work really well, and they do like a sports tyre, which tries to fit in the middle there. It tries to give the grip of a super sport type tyre, yet the feel of a road tyre. And I would I'd put a line in the sand which way you're going to go with them. If you're going to go ride the bike a lot on track, is run a track tyre and run tyre warmers, because you have much more confidence in the early part of your lap or of your laps. Either way, this one here, so I think you brake a wee bit early, a little bit soft, good line though, you make the apex, which is great, pick up the throttle. From then on, it's really good. You start to develop the throttle. I can see the revs are starting to go up. You don't run out too wide in the track, you make the second apex. I'm listening now, Can you hear the bikes? What? That roar's starting, because you've got the throttle open a lot harder. Can you hear that second what? That's when you fully open the throttle. You can actually hear when you've got the throttle open, probably, I don't know, 30-40%, and then listen to that and that's when you finally get the taps open fully. You hear that that's when you've got the throttle fully open at that point. If you're running lots and lots of traction control, you might actually have the throttle open fully sometimes, but because you're running lots of traction, because you can remember your throttle, the throttle twist grip isn't actually connected to the injector throttle bodies. It goes through the computer, and the computer says, "Oh, I'm trying to help you here. I'm making it really safe for you, and I'm waiting until the bike's upright before I really open the throttle." So there can be a definite disconnect between the throttle and what the engine's actually doing. And this is where taking traction control off the bike, i.e. winding it down to a zero or even a negative, even if it's on negative 5, 6, 7, you've still got some traction control there. It's not completely off, but that will give you much more throttle control, and you'll have a little bit more movement in the bike, because it will allow a little bit of wheel spin, but it will also give you so much more drive out the corners. And it sometimes stops that sort of, you've got the throttle open fully, and then all of a sudden it feels like the bike sets off. It kind of takes that out, because it's helping you as much as you can. Anyway, full gas down here, over the wheelie hump. Coming into the braking area, I think you do a pretty good job really in the brakes, bringing the bike up to the right hand side of the track. line through here, your tip in is great, perfect tip in. You can run the curbs here. Now, if you go and watch the either not the MotoGP particularly, but if you watch the British Superbike, they're running probably about there across the line. These curbs, if you walk the track, they get a little bit rough as you get up to the green. So I would suggest use no more than that running across there, but make sure as you run through that curb that you're off the throttle, off the brakes, and ideally pick up the throttle just as you kind of run over them, and it just sort of helps the front wheel at that point. Rapid change of direction. Oops, there we go. Rapid change of direction, which is good. You've picked up the throttle and you're driving, and once again, running the curb across there. More or less where you are in the track here, there's a little bit of a dip in the track which can get the bike kind of wallowing in a little bit as you're going through the dip. Where if you run the curb there, not right up here because it's quite rough and lofty, makes the bike jump about a bit. So run sort of halfway across that curb, and what it does is the line you're on is a sort of a traditional line, but it makes the corner more kind of slightly more acute. Where running across it here makes it slightly more open. You're opening the radius by effectively moving the apex a little bit. So you can run the curb, definitely run the curb coming out because you're on the positive throttle. And you can, if you want to, run the curb going in, should you gain the confidence in that. Wet, don't do it. Don't run the curbs in the wet. In fact, stay off anything painted in the wet if you can avoid it. Next thing coming out of here, I've got chicane, yeah, good braking, line okay, possibly run both curbs, particularly the exit curb, because that helps to straight line you run down to McLeans. Drive out. The drive out is pretty poor. If you listen to the bike again, it's not straight down to Melbourne, but it's not. There isn't much of a kink at the end of the day. And listen to the rate of acceleration. It's all it's like you sort of you're bedding the bike in. There's no like drive, get the thing going. If you look at where you change gear, would you say you're short shifting? Oops. Get back down. About 11 and a half. You listening to the bike and looking at what the tacho's telling me is you're accelerating, obviously, because we've built up some speed. But it's not like if you listen to the bike coming down the straight, for argument's sake, let's get onto the straight, coming onto the start-finish straight. Now, what's your third? That's acceleration. You've got the taps open there. You can see by how quickly the needle was jumping up, where previously on the run down to Melbourne, it was a progressional build-up. Plus the short shift. Short shifts are not required unless you need to, for argument's sake, going down into Hollywood, down Craner curves. So more of a drive out here. You're not accelerating 100%. Not accelerating 100%. You're not maximising what the bike is capable of. I'm going down the pan. Approaching to Melbourne, really good. Nice and strong on the brakes. This particular lap, I think it kind of rushed at you a little bit. The corner, you slightly missed it. Pull it back, you get on the throttle, you pull it back and you make the second apex, which is super important because that gives you a really good exit. Generally speaking, when I'm tipping into Melbourne, it's difficult to see, but I very often don't make the first apex. I'm more conscious about getting rid of speed, getting the thing turned, getting it back to the second apex with a good trajectory out the corner. Your trajectory is perfect here. If you go round it, and let's say you manage to get to the first apex, often it means that you apex the second apex too early, and it means the trajectory is more across there than where you've got the bike pointing sort of up the track. And what that does is gives you a massive amount of track to use on the exit, because if your trajectory is that way, you effectively have to turn tight, where you've sort of done the turn now. This is all about getting the thing straight and up the hill towards Goddards. Now you know what I'm going to tell you now, aren't you? I've listened to the bike. Why are we changing gear at 11,000 RPM? It's a straight. Maximise what the bike can do. Get it wound up. So your throttle development started off great because you picked the throttle up. You can hear more. You've got the throttle open before you get to the second apex. All going really good. By the time you get to now, it should be absolutely buried, and using the traction to keep you kind of safe. You've got 30 degrees on. You know, you're in the, what I call it, in the V there, which is where you can use 100% throttle without a problem. You've just got to trust the bike a little bit more. Don't short shift. You know, make the thing work for a living. Second gear is probably the gear to use. Occasionally, I run mine on road gearing. Occasionally, if I've gone in there and I've tried to nip underneath somebody, I'll hook it back to first gear to give the bike a real shoot out the corner. But then the thing's just trying to wheelie too much, particularly if you've got the throttle open hard. So second gear, I think, is probably the right gear, even with road gear in there. Right, Goddards, I put here, great line. You do a late apex, drive onto the straight, and I said, for me, this is your best corner. I think you do a great job. It's very easy here to get sucked into the corner, and so many people come into this corner and they're already sort of aiming for the curve there, which completely screws your exit. You're sort of running quite late and then sort of deep into the corner, and then you come back for a second apex, a late, not a second, but a late apex. So for me, this is a great corner for you. But I'm ignoring the curb now there, which is good. I was looking where you picked the throttle up, which was also very good. There's a tarmac line. You can just see a separation line. That is if once you get over that, generally speaking, you're safe. Now, I don't want to introduce that word safe and unsafe, but so many people fall off going into Goddards because if we look at the circuit, let's have a quick look. It's worth having a quick look at this, to be honest. Let's have a little peruse over at Goddards. There we go. Now, it's not terribly obvious, but Donington Park didn't used to have Goddards. The circuit used to come down the straight and basically go right and then left, which is essentially what it does on the national circuit here. But this is the old circuit. Now, what happens here is traditionally when you go around a right-hand corner, you've got a slightly positive camber to the right, and then when you go left, you've got a positive camber to the left. So what's happening here is as you're going into this, as you're coming up here, the track is completely flat here. But as you go into the corner, for a small slice of the corner, probably about that much of the corner, it almost goes to negative because it's running essentially what the track used to be round here, which was a slight camber to the right. So it's almost like you're dropping onto the wrong camber of the track. So this is the danger part of the track, and you get round that by your line late tipping and then coming back. That separation line is about there. So for me, you do a really good job of the corner. I think we can bring up your speed a little bit on the approach and bring up your speed physically around the corner, but the line itself genuinely is really good. Super happy with that one. And then onto the straight. Short shift not required. Then you're ready to get going down. So it's good. So keep the gear that you're going round Goddards in, but just get a little more comfortable. And as the bike's starting to sit up, kind of roll, develop right the way, and you use the RPM and that drive out the corner, and that really pings you onto the straight. It'll obviously affect what I don't know what you're using as a braking reference point here, but generally speaking, on a superbike, I use getting close to the end of the curb, end of the concrete wall here, the edge of the pit lane wall. On smaller, lower capacity bikes, you start to get into the triangle or this painted section, but that's really a bit late. You're not going to get the bloody thing stopped. But if you get a really good exit out of the corner and you get onto the throttle earlier, it'll obviously affect your braking here, because you'll be sort of 5 up to 10 miles an hour faster here, which obviously affects how you're going to slow down. So if you get a good exit and you're on the throttle earlier, what I would suggest to do is adjust, think about braking fractionally earlier, so that you can you don't basically outbrake yourself going down into Redgate. So I hope that some of that gives you some tips or helping hands there. The overall is stop short shifting if it's unnecessary the vast percentage of the time, apart from Hollywood. That's sort of driving really hard up into fourth and then part throttle down the hill. And then the second short shift is when you go out of the old hairpin, drive real hard as you transition over to the left, ease back on the throttle into fourth, past the kink, and then develop the throttle in fourth up the hill. That's what I would suggest to do there. Don't follow the edge of the track as your golden guideline, in the sense that you're going down Craner curves. That's why you're doing the Thripney bitting, is because you're using the edge of the track. Try and picture it in your mind, that Google Maps image of the kinks, and it's the last curve that you want to be right over to. So it's like an arc. It sometimes feels that you're not going to get over there, particularly if you accelerated hard. But you will get there progressively, particularly when you kind of ease back and you stop that violent acceleration, that like the first part of coming out of Redgate, and then progressively bring the bike over to the right. In your mind's eye, you've got to see that second curb, as opposed to following the edge of the track and kind of doing that. Okay, Chris, if there's anything I've confused you by, or I've used terminology you're not sure of or whatever, or you want to ask questions, give us a shout back and I'll go over it with you on the phone or whatever you want to do. Hope you're well. Enjoy your riding. I'll speak to you soon.